Hey everyone, today we're going to be building this awesome deck. I'll be explaining what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and maybe you'll learn something. If you already know everything there is to know about building a deck, then maybe you'll find it entertaining instead. And I'm sure there's lots of people who are just dying to tell me in the comments about how I'm doing everything wrong. I started building before I started filming, so I've already got deck blocks put in place, and I've cut to 6x6 posts to set everything level. Here I am setting the first beam in place, and you'll notice I'm using post to beam connectors and nailing them in with a fancy nail gun. That's called a metal connector nailer or a positive placement nail gun, and it uses a special kind of nails that are the right kind of nails to use for metal hangers. And here I am building a beam. And there's a right way to build a laminated beam, and there's a lot of wrong ways. I've seen a lot of wrong ways on YouTube, so you should check out my video on how to properly laminate a beam. Hopefully you can learn from that. And I'm setting another beam into place and making sure I've sitting level. And a third beam is sitting on top because this beam miters into the other one so that both beams can sit on that post. And I'm just running my framing square down it so that I can get my lines and then connect the dots and cut a accurate miter to miter the beams together. Now you might be thinking, but that beam has nails in it. Well, if you cut slowly, a carbide tipped saw blade will cut through nails just fine and won't really damage the blade. Now that I've got my miter cut, I can place my two beams together. I'm gonna wait to nail them into the posts until I have both of them placed into the right spot, and I make sure that they fit. And look at that. They nicely miter together. And I'm going to go around and check, make sure it's level, and nail it together. And look at that. I got beams in place. You may notice that joist that's sitting there. That's there because I don't have a 16-foot level. So I pick my straightest joist out of the pile, and since they're what I'm going to be building with anyways, I set the joist from beam to beam to get my level from front to back and set my 6-foot level on top of that. And I can start putting my joists in. You might be wondering what those pieces of 6x6 all over the place are. Well, they're just pieces of 6x6 that are keeping the landscape cloth from blowing away. The landscape cloth is there to keep green stuff from growing up through the deck. Now you notice that the joists are on a diagonal connection up on the one side of the deck here, and the other side hangs off. So I've got a string line cut run on each end that gives me a straight edge on my straight end, and that lets me get my lengths for by cutting for the diagonal and running it out, and then just marking where the string is and cutting it. You'll also notice that there's joist hangers on the diagonal end. They're a special skewable joist hanger, and they're kind of a pain, and you have to nail them together before you fasten the other end of the beam, because as you can see, I'm nailing it and then rotating the beam over, because otherwise you can't get in there with the gun or with anything convenient at all to put them together. So you kind of have to plan how your order of putting things together, and really think about how you're going to put it together when you have those skewable joist hangers. Otherwise, you're going to be shit out of luck and not be able to get them in. The end on the beam doesn't need hangers. It just gets toe-nailed into the beam with two nails on one side and one nail on the other. One thing I will say about all of the nails that are going into this is it's outdoors and it's a deck, and so it's an outdoor deck, and that means you want to use all galvanized nails. Galvanized nails cost twice as much as the non-galvanized ones, but it's 100% worth spending the extra money on it. All of these joists are laid out at 16 inches on center, and both sides have been laid out before I started nailing them in. And you'll notice at the front end I have got blocking in there, and that's so that my double rim joist stays straight, and then I can go off of that and straighten all the rest of them. And now here you see I got my joists that are hanging past the edge where the deck is supposed to be, and I'm just going along with my skill saw, cutting them off, and much less measuring and swearing and trying to figure out how to get things to fit into a diagonal exactly right. I'm sure you're wondering why I'm running around here with a nail gun. I'm just nailing on little holders onto the bottom of the joists so that I can put on my rib joist with my two hands instead of having a helper. So I set my rim joist in place, and it's got to all get nailed in place. And it's a little bent, so I'm using a lever, another board, to straighten it out to match the rest of my joists. And the rule of thumb here with when you're nailing things together is you have one nail for every 2 inch of board. So if you've got a 2x8, then you want 4 nails. If you got a 2x10, then you want 5. If you got a 2x4, then you want 2. Here I am over at my miter saw. What I've done is I set up a depth stop on the miter saw so that I can repeatedly make the same cut of the same length. It takes pretty much as longer to measure something and mark it than it does to cut it. And if you're going to need to cut the same of something a whole bunch of times, then set up a depth stop or set up some kind of a jig, and it'll make your life go a lot faster. So why am I cutting these little blocks of wood? Well, because of the span across here of these joists, they all need bridging that ties them together, like those little blocks that are sitting on the in between the rim joist there. So I like to run a chalk line so that the bridging goes in nice and straight, which doesn't take much longer, but it ends up looking a lot nicer. It doesn't necessarily need to be straight, but if anyone looks at it, then it just looks better. And they are staggered so that they're easier to nail in, and on either side of the chalk line, and they run all the way across, and that stiffens everything up. And on top of that, it also pulls the joists straight and lands them at your 16-inch centers all the way across, instead of having your joists bow out or whatever, and your joist centers aren't where they belong when you try and put a joint in, and then you waste some lumber. If you've laid out all your joists at 16 inches on center, then your bridging length is going to be 14 3/8. Now, while I finish up here and get ready to start putting on deck boards, maybe you could do me a favor and click that like button and subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell notification, and that would help out a lot. It takes a lot of work to make these videos. I was going to make the stuff anyways, but not necessarily the videos, so I really appreciate it when people subscribe and like and leave feedback and comments, even when they think I'm stupid. As you can see, I got one deck board laid in there, and I got the second one pretty much there. And now you're always going to want to start at the outside, the part that you're going to see the most. The back end, you can cut the board off, and it doesn't have to be quite as beautiful as the rest of it. It should still be pretty beautiful, but you always want to start your deck boards at the most visible point. And you'll notice I have a bit of an overhang here. That's because there's going to be a step underneath, and you want a little bit of an overhang because people have toes on the end of their feet, and it works better when you have a step with a little bit of an overhang. And I'm getting all that all screwed in there, and then looks like I can start putting in the deck boards. So the first one I'm cutting, I'm getting my angle, and instead of having to mark and cut an angle every time, the angle should stay the same the whole way across. So I've got my angle for that angled cut, and I can set the angle on my miter saw and cut that angle on the boards. And then the end of the board that hangs off at the end, at the far end of the deck there, it can just hang off. I don't want a million feet of it hanging off the end because I want to use up all my boards and conserve them, but we don't need to cut them right to the edge of the rim joist yet because there's a chance the rim joist isn't perfectly straight, but a chalk line is perfectly straight. So I can run a chalk line and cut the end off afterwards. You notice I got like a bunch of little boards there. This is what I like to use for board spacers. I call them nail boards. I just use little offcuts of wood, and I nail a spike through them, and that framing spike is a pretty good deck board spacing. Some people will tell you, oh, well, pressure treated deck boards, you don't need to put a space in them because they're going to shrink because they're pressure treated and they're wet. Well, you should always put a space into a deck board because it's really important that a deck can drain water. Not just water, but debris and stuff. And if you space them right tight, then chances are they're going to end up never ending up draining water properly. And it'll take probably like 5 or more years off of the life of your deck. As you can see, I'm able to cut and just lay out quite a few deck boards because the angle stays the same and I don't need an exact length on the end. So that lets me cut them all. And here you can see I'm just going over the ends with a roundover bit with my trim router. It just puts the same roundness on the end cut as the edge of the board has, and it makes it look much cleaner, and instead of having that straight saw cut end, and it just makes it looks nice. It's really not that important, but I like to do it. And you can probably see I got my hammer and cat's paw and or nail puller, whatever you want to call it. If you pound the nail puller into the joist, you can use it to pry over a board because lumber, dimensional lumber like this, these are 5/4 deck boards. It's never perfectly straight, but you want your deck boards to be straight. So what you're going to do is you're going to start your first board off straight, and then you're going to straighten them. And to straighten them, you need a little bit of prying power. And instead of trying to just muscle it over, use your tools. Use the pry bar. Wow, while I was recording this voiceover, I just realized like how bald my head really is. Man. So you're going to definitely want to put 2 screws into every joist on every part of the board that connects every joist. If you skip a joist, or if you just put 1 screw, then eventually you'll have a deck board that has like a little bit of a gap in it, and the deck boards will go clickety clack when people walk on them. You don't want that. Another thing that's really important to do is to pull a tape measure every 3 or 4 or 5 deck boards and make sure that your dimension is the same from one end to the other, because not only is lumber not straight, it's also not perfectly the same dimension all the way across, and you also might just pull them harder or not. So you want to, every 4 or 5 boards, you're going to pull a tape measure and make sure that your deck boards are the same width from the start of your deck until the board that you're at one end to the other, or if it's a fairly long deck, then pull it in the middle as well, and step aside every once in a while and just eyeball down the line of a deck board and make sure it looks straight. If you take a little bit of time to take pride in your work and do a good job, it really makes a huge difference. Screwing down deck boards is pretty tedious, and watching a guy screwing down deck boards can be pretty tedious too, unless he's as sexy as I am. Look at that. Look at that sexy man. Generally, I like to build decks and screw down deck boards with a helper. And I'll have the helper or two helpers screwing down boards while I'm the guy that's cutting the boards and feeding them to the guys that are screwing the boards down. Thing is, when you have a helper, you got to really beat it into their head that they have to pull a tape every 4 or 5 boards, or they won't do it, and then you end up having to pull up a bunch of deck boards and put them down again because they went way off. And speaking of helpers, I got one now. James hasn't done any of this before, so I've given him a thorough explanation and checking on him a little bit to make sure he's getting it right, and seeing if he needs any little tips or help while I cut boards and feed them to him. It's really not a particularly difficult job to screw down deck boards, but a little bit of knowledge is kind of necessary, which is what I've explained to you already about keeping them straight and screwing every board and using the spacers and all of that jazz. And it goes a lot quicker when you got a guy screwing down boards. Plus, you're not the guy kneeling down screwing down the boards if you're the guy cutting them. And you'll notice that the boards don't run the full length of the deck anymore. So you're not going to want to put the joints in the boards next to each other. And you're never, ever going to want to have a deck board that contacts less than 3 joists. So you'll want to figure out a stagger pattern that is you can go random, or you can go stagger pattern that is the same and repeats, but you want to keep your joints away from each other as much as possible. And generally, I like to keep a stagger pattern of about 4 or 5 boards before joint will repeat itself. That's not always possible if you don't have a long enough deck, but it's good to keep your joints away from each other because it just it doesn't look awesome, and it's not quite as strong when your joints in your board line up. And as James is working on screwing down the deck boards because I got ahead of him, I am nailing in blocking for a potential railing. We're going to decide after the deck is finished if it really needs to have a railing over there or not, but it is much, much, much easier to put your blocking in for your railing posts before you've put all your deck boards on, because if you try to put blocking in after your deck boards are all on, then you've got to nail it in from underneath. And underneath of this deck is not very big, and so that would be annoying. And sometimes they're tall, and that's annoying too, because you got to get up there on a ladder to get your blocking in. And it looks like James here is about to decide that it's beer o'clock, and maybe you'll decide that it's subscribe o'clock, and like o'clock, and leave a comment o'clock. Well, I'm left on my own to finish putting down deck boards the next day. So I'm going to work away putting down some more to the deck boards, and then I'll take a little break from deck boards, and I'll finish putting in my railing blocking, and then I'll put in some more deck boards. And I don't know how long you can sit there and listen to me talk about putting on deck boards while watching me put on deck boards. It seems a little boring to me. I don't know if it is for you. You'll notice I'm using my nail boards to keep the spacers. I'm pulling tape once every few boards because you always need to keep doing that. And I'm staggering my joints. So, yeah, it's getting a little bit boring in here. A little bit boring. I suppose if I had a channel sponsor, then I would be able to tell you about their awesome product while you watch the little bit boring part of me screwing down deck boards. But I don't have a channel sponsor, so maybe I'll just sponsor myself. Hey, this is my channel. You should subscribe to it, and you should tell people about it, because maybe you'll learn things. Maybe you'll be entertained. I don't know. It's a pretty awesome place. Unless you don't think it's awesome, and then you should probably complain about it in the comments, because uh, it's completely impossible to just not watch something that you don't like on the internet. You are forced to watch it, and because you were forced to watch it, you have to complain about your disgust at the video in the comments, that the video that you decided to watch. Yeah, that one. I kind of thought, when I started doing the voiceover for this video, that I might run out of things to talk about and tell you what I was doing during this video, because it's kind of a long video. So let's speed it up a little bit more until I start doing something a little bit more interesting that I can tell you about. Hey, there's something more interesting. I'm building the stairs. Since there's only one step here, and the step runs all the way along the edge of the deck, because there's a walkway along it, so you can just step up onto it at any time, I don't need to make a stair stringer. Basically, my step is framed in like a mini deck. So I got 16-inch centers to screw my deck boards into, and then it's just going to sit onto the ground. Except the ground isn't perfectly flat, so I'm going to have to cut that on an angle, and I marked that angle cut ahead of time and put my nails in so that I'd have things nailed together, and that will let it sit level and be a good base to put the deck boards onto. And this it's just going to sit onto the ground. I don't really need deck blocks for it. It is nailed into the deck, into that beam on the edge, so it's not going to move around or separate from the deck, and it should stay pretty level, just sitting on the ground like that. And it's worth spending some time to fiddle around with it and just make sure you get everything level. If you want to learn how to make stair stringers, then conveniently I have made a video about how to make stair stringers, so that you can cut your own custom stair stringers, and it's not as difficult as you think it is once someone shows you how to do it. So you should definitely check that out. You can find that on my channel. Maybe I'll even put links to some other videos in the description. And as you can see, the stairs are, well, the stair platform's coming along nicely. You can see on the edge of the deck that I've cut the end of the deck boards off. They're all nice and straight now. When you do that, so you're going to want to put a chalk line along, but you're going to want to make sure your chalk line is filled with chalk, not dye. So generally that's going to be the blue chalk, but the dyes are like the black or the blue or the red, and they leave a really permanent mark. And when you're working on top of a finished deck, you don't want to leave a whole bunch of colorful permanent marks on there, because it's really permanent and it doesn't wash off. So make it sure it's the actual chalk and not the dye, and then you can cut it just with your skill saw along the edge if you're reasonable with a skill saw and can make a reasonably straight cut. And if you want, you can use a track saw, or you can use a DIY track saw, which is really cheap and easy to make. If you have any questions about what I did or for your project, leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to give you a useful answer. And here we have the finished deck. Isn't that beautiful? Look at that. The plants have all grown back up. It's got furniture on it. It has the same roundness as the sides do. And I'll let you in a little secret. If you run that round over on the end of the deck boards, it'll hide a lot of sins. So if your cut along that edge isn't completely perfect, that round over bit will hide it a little bit. And as you can see, I'm getting my deck boards onto my step, and I'm going to have the same overhang on the edge of that as I had on the top of the deck, and it's the same angle. And you notice that I put some screws into the side of the deck board, so I've screwed the deck board together and screwed it to the joists, or stair stringer or whatever you want to call it. And it just holds that joint together a little bit better. So we're getting really close to being all finished here. All that's going to be left once I get this last board onto the step is some cleanup, and then the deck is finished and good to go. So hopefully this gives you some ideas on how to build your own deck. I probably should have taken all of those grass and stuff that's growing up into the interlock out to make a cleaner looking finish video, but well, I didn't, so you get what you get. Nothing left to do but to like, subscribe, leave a comment, and check out some of my other videos.